Have you ever watched your own mother look you dead in the eyes, hand you something broken, and tell you it's exactly what you deserve? I need you to picture something. It's a Thursday night, almost 10 o'clock. I'm standing in a half-gutted cabin on the shore of Lake Anna, Virginia. The floorboards are torn up. Sawdust covers everything. The air smells like old wood and damp earth. And in my arms, pressed tight against my chest, is a rusted metal trunk that was sealed behind a concrete wall for over a decade. My initials are scratched into the lid. Behind me, the front door swings open so hard it cracks against the wall. My mother, Diane Caldwell, steps inside. Her heels click on the plywood subflooring. My older sister Christine is right behind her, arms crossed, jaw set, standing in the doorway like she's blocking an exit. Diane's eyes lock onto the trunk. She doesn't ask what it is. She doesn't ask if I'm okay. She walks straight toward me and holds out her hand. Her voice is the voice she uses when she wants to sound calm while doing something cruel. Linda. Whatever is in that box belongs to this family. You are going to hand it over, and we are going to move past this. Tonight. Christine shifts her weight in the doorway. Just give it to her, Linda. You're embarrassing yourself over a shack that should have been torn down years ago. I look at both of them. My mother, whose perfume I can smell from 5 feet away, standing in a cabin she called worthless. My sister, who hasn't spoken to me in 4 months, suddenly here at 10 at night demanding I hand over something from a house she said wasn't worth the gas to drive to. And I feel something I have never felt before in the presence of my family. I feel steady. Not angry. Not afraid. Just absolutely, completely steady. I pull the trunk closer to my chest and say something I've never said to either of them in 31 years of being alive. You should leave. Both of you. Now. My mother's mouth opens. Nothing comes out. Christine blinks twice. Neither of them moves. But they will. Because what is inside this trunk doesn't just prove them wrong. It proves they are criminals. And my grandmother, the woman they told me didn't love me enough to leave me anything real, she's the one who made sure I'd find it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 5 months. To a conference room in Richmond, Virginia. The morning my grandmother's will was read, and my mother smiled while handing me the worst inheritance she could find. My name is Linda Caldwell. I'm 31 years old. I work at a domestic violence shelter in Richmond, Virginia. I make enough to cover rent, gas, and groceries, sometimes all 3 in the same month, sometimes not. My family doesn't understand what I do. Actually, that's generous. They don't care. Every other Sunday at 5 o'clock, the Caldwell family gathers for dinner at my parents' house in the west end of Richmond. A red brick colonial with a wide porch and an American flag by the front door. From the outside, it looks like the kind of home where people hug each other in the kitchen and argue about football. Inside, it's more like a performance review where the verdict's already been decided before anyone speaks. My father, Robert Caldwell, everyone calls him Bob, sits at the head of the table. My mother Diane takes the seat to his right. My older sister Christine sits across from her. And I sit at the far end, closest to the kitchen, close enough to clear the plates when everyone else disappears. That particular Sunday, Christine had news. She'd just closed a 7-figure commercial real estate deal in Norfolk. My father set down his fork and smiled. Not a warm smile. A proud one. The smile of a man who believes his daughter's success came directly from his bloodline. Norfolk, he said slowly. That's the Waterford Group account? Lead broker on the listing, Christine replied. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. The whole room was already smiling for her. I waited for a pause. Then I said carefully, this week we helped a mother and her 2 daughters get into permanent housing. They'd been in the shelter for. That's sweet, honey. My mother didn't even look at me. She turned right back to Christine. Tell your father about the commission structure. And just like that, the conversation moved on like I hadn't spoken. I lowered my eyes and cut my chicken in silence. After dinner, I stood at the sink washing dishes while everyone else disappeared. Christine left without a word. My parents retreated to the den. No one asked me to stay. No one asked me anything. On the drive home, a voicemail lit up my phone. My grandmother's voice. Frances Weber. Warm, unhurried, steady as always. Linda, I made your peach cobbler today. Better come get it before your mother does. She called every Thursday. She remembered my favorite dessert. She asked about my clients and my bad days. She listened when no one else would. Once, 2 summers before she died, we were sitting on the porch of her old cabin on Lake Anna. The place had been empty for years. Nobody in the family visited anymore. She was staring at the walls like they were holding a private conversation. Then she said something I didn't understand at the time. That cabin holds more than people think, Linda. When the time comes, don't let them take it from you. I thought she was being sentimental. Talking about memories. She said that 3 months before she died. She wasn't talking about memories at all. The call came on a Wednesday morning at 1:47. A nurse from VCU Medical Center spoke in that careful, practiced tone hospitals use for the worst possible news. Ms. Caldwell, I'm calling about your grandmother, Frances Weber. She passed away in her sleep about an hour ago. I'm very sorry. I don't remember hanging up. What I remember is reaching for my car keys and knocking a glass off the counter. It shattered across the kitchen tile. I stepped right over the broken pieces in bare feet and didn't feel a thing until I was already on the highway and saw blood on the gas pedal. I arrived at the hospital 35 minutes later. 2 cars were already in the lot. My father's gray pickup and a black sedan I didn't recognize. Inside, I expected to find my family beside my grandmother's bed. Instead, they were standing in the hallway near the elevators, my father, my mother, and a man in a dark suit I had never seen before. He held a leather folder. My father was nodding at something the man had said. Christine leaned against the wall scrolling through her phone. Her eyes were completely dry. No one noticed me walk past them. I stepped into the room alone. My grandmother lay quiet and still, her hands folded gently across her chest. The monitors were already off. The room was silent, but not the hollow kind. It felt like she had just finished speaking and was waiting for someone to sit down and listen. On her wrist, she still wore the bracelet. Thin copper, tarnished, plain. I reached down and closed my hand around it. When I stepped back into the hall, my father was already buttoning his coat. We need to talk about the estate, he said. Soon. No hand on my shoulder. No, are you okay? My mother adjusted her scarf. Your grandmother was very old, Linda. Let's focus on what matters now. I turned to the nurse. Can I keep the bracelet? She nodded. My mother glanced at it. It's dollar store junk, Linda. Take it if you want. I slipped the bracelet into my coat pocket and pressed my hand over it the entire drive home. It was still warm. Later, I would learn the man in the dark suit was an attorney named Martin Hale. A man my grandmother had never hired. A man who somehow appeared at the hospital at 2 in the morning, before most of the family had even been notified. But I didn't know that yet. Not that night. The funeral was held at Grace Episcopal Church in Richmond. Over 100 people came. My grandmother was the kind of woman who remembered your children's names and always had a plate of food ready when someone showed up unannounced. People loved her without effort. My father delivered the eulogy. Navy suit, controlled voice, every word carefully rehearsed. Frances Weber was the heart of this family. She believed in loyalty. She believed in legacy. We will honor her by staying united. I sat in the second row and counted the lies. In the last 3 years of her life, Bob visited my grandmother exactly twice. Both visits lasted under an hour. After the service, a woman gently touched my elbow near the church steps. Helen Marsh. 82 years old. My grandmother's closest friend for over 50 years. She pulled me aside and lowered her voice. Your grandmother talked about you constantly, Linda. Every single week. Her eyes were red but sharp. She was worried. She told me she'd taken precautions. Precautions for what? I asked. Helen opened her mouth, then closed it. My mother was walking toward us with a wide, practiced smile. Helen, thank you so much for being here. Diane wrapped her in a hug that lasted exactly long enough for someone nearby to see it. Helen stepped back. Before she walked away, she gave me one look. The kind that said, not here. Not now. But soon. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the copper bracelet on my nightstand. Precautions. What kind of precautions does a woman take when she's afraid of her own family? 3 weeks later, we sat in the office of Martin Hale, attorney at law. His conference room felt cold. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, a table too long for 5 people. My father sat at one end, legs crossed, confident. My mother sat beside him, perfectly upright. Christine scrolled through her phone. Hale opened a leather folder and began reading. To Diane and Robert Caldwell, management of the Weber Family Trust, valued at approximately $1.8 million, including control of all liquid assets and investment accounts. My father gave a slow, satisfied nod. To Christine Caldwell, the primary residence in the Fan District of Richmond, along with the associated investment portfolio. Christine barely looked up. Then Hale read the last line. To Linda Caldwell, the property located at 1847 Lakeshore Trail, Lake Anna, Virginia. I waited for more. There was no more. Lakeshore Trail is my grandmother's old cabin. Abandoned for over 12 years. The roof leaks. The porch sags. The county condemned the electrical 2 years ago. Everyone at that table knew exactly what that cabin was. My mother folded her hands and looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It was satisfaction disguised as sympathy. Mom knew your limits, Linda. She gave you something small you could handle. My father leaned slightly toward me. At least you have a roof. Not everyone gets that. Christine never looked up from her phone. I stared at Martin Hale. My grandmother told me she would take care of me. She said it to my face. This is not what she wanted. My father's voice dropped low. Are you calling your dead grandmother a liar? The room went completely still. I stood. Took my coat. Walked out without looking at any of them. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for 9 minutes before I could start the engine. My hands shook against the steering wheel until the trembling finally stopped. That's when the address caught my attention. Lakeshore Trail. The same cabin. The same porch. The same walls my grandmother stared at when she said, "That cabin holds more than people think, Linda. Don't let them take it from you." I turned the key and started driving. The cabin on Lakeshore Trail looked like it had fought a long war with time and lost. The porch sagged on one side. 3 windows were cracked. Vines crawled past the railing up toward the roof. A bird had nested in the gutter above the front door. I walked up the steps. The front door groaned loudly, but opened. Inside, dust, mildew, and silence. The floorboards felt soft underfoot, weakened by years of rain leaking through the roof. Half the stair railing was missing. Then I noticed something above the fireplace in the kitchen. A small framed photograph, faded and covered in grime. A young woman standing in front of this very cabin, holding a baby, the yard behind her clean, the porch freshly painted white. I turned the frame over. On the back, in faded ink, "For my Linda, the cabin remembers." I placed the photo carefully on the counter and called a contractor my co-worker at the shelter had recommended. Dale Hubbard answered on the second ring and came out that same afternoon. He walked through every room without speaking. Pressed his boot into the floors. Knocked on the walls. Ran a hand along the crumbling plaster. When he finished, he stood on the porch and removed his cap. 55,000 minimum, he said. You got that kind of money? I didn't. I had 19,000 in savings and a credit line I'd never touched. Not enough. But everything I had. I'll make it work, I said. Dale studied my face, then nodded once. I'll trim where I can. His crew started the following Monday. That same week, my father called. His voice was calm and practiced. That cabin's a money pit, Linda. I'll buy it from you. 10,000 cash. At least you'd walk away with something. $10,000. For the cabin my grandmother grew up in. The cabin she told me to protect. No, I said. Silence. Then his voice turned cold. You're making a mistake. I hung up. The next morning, my mother sent a text. 3 long paragraphs. The first began, "You're tearing this family apart." The second, "Your grandmother would be ashamed of how you're behaving." The third, "If you hand over whatever you found, we can move past this as a family." She ended the message with a heart emoji. I read it once. Closed the phone. Didn't reply. Then something worse happened. My credit union called. A man claiming to be your father contacted us about the details of your personal loan. We didn't release any information, but we need to verify. Did you authorize that inquiry? I said no. And suddenly I understood. They weren't waiting for me to fail. They were trying to make sure I did. 2 days later, Dale called. His voice was different. Tight and low. He never called after hours. Linda, there's something under the kitchen floor. You need to come see this. I didn't waste time asking questions. Something in his voice told me not to. The drive from Richmond to Lake Anna normally takes about 90 minutes. That night I made it in just over an hour. My headlights swept through the trees as I turned onto Lakeshore Trail. Dale's truck was parked at an angle in the gravel. He stood on the porch holding his cap in both hands. It's inside, he said. Beneath the original floorboards, Dale's crew had found a sealed root cellar. Not on any blueprint. Deliberately hidden with poured concrete that someone had broken open from inside decades ago and resealed. Inside the cellar sat a rusted metal trunk. About 2 feet long, a foot wide. Covered in decades of dust. On the lid, scratched into the metal in careful letters, were my initials. LC. I knelt beside it. The combination lock had 4 digits. I tried my grandmother's birthday. Nothing. I tried the cabin's address. Nothing. Then I tried the simplest number I could think of. My own birthday. April 7th. 0-4-0-7, the lock clicked. Inside, the trunk was divided into 3 compartments, each lined with cloth, the kind of careful you only give to things that matter deeply. The first compartment held a thick envelope sealed with wax. I broke it open. Inside, a handwritten document. 4 pages on ruled paper. At the top, in my grandmother's unmistakable handwriting, last will and testament of Francis and Weber. Dated 14 months before the will Martin Hale read in his office. 2 witness signatures. A notary stamp. This was the real one. The second compartment held another envelope. A letter. 4 handwritten pages. The first line read, "My sweet Linda, if you're reading this, they did exactly what I knew they would." My vision blurred. I pressed my palm against my eyes and kept reading. She wrote about Diane. About the family trust. About the pressure, the fear, the isolation. They had been taking from me for almost 2 years, she wrote. I could not stop them alone. So I prepared. The third compartment held a thick manila envelope stamped in red ink, private. Dale stood in the doorway gripping the frame. You want me to call someone? I looked up at him. Call the police, I said. And don't tell my family. But there was something else. In the letter, one line I didn't understand yet: "The bracelet I gave you isn't jewelry, Linda. It's a key." Police documented everything. A detective contacted the county district attorney. The bank records told a devastating story: $370,000 transferred from my grandmother's trust into an account controlled by Diane Caldwell over 19 months. Each transfer carried an authorization form with my grandmother's signature. But my grandmother had requested duplicate statements mailed to a private P.O. box. She'd highlighted every single one. Beside the forged signatures, she'd written in steady pencil, "I did not authorize this. This is not my handwriting." I hired an estate litigation attorney named Nora Sims. She reviewed everything and said 6 words that changed the entire direction of my life. "Your grandmother didn't leave you a cabin. She left you a case." Then the family struck back. Someone saw the police cars at the cabin. Diane called crying, "A flawless performance. Whatever you found, just bring it home. We can sort this out as a family." Bob called with the warning, "You don't want to make enemies of your own parents." Christine texted, "Dad's lawyer will bury you." But the worst blow was still coming. 2 days later, Nora forwarded me a filing. A petition for mental competency evaluation, submitted to the county court. The petitioner wasn't my father. It was my mother. Her written statement read, "My daughter has a documented history of anxiety and depression. Since her grandmother's death, she has made increasingly erratic decisions. 2 years earlier, I'd gone to therapy. For grief. For the weight of being invisible inside my own family. I told my mother because I thought she might understand. She didn't understand. She saved that information. And now she was using it to strip away my legal standing." Nora called within the hour. "If they succeed, you can't sue. You can't testify. You become a ward of the court. We need to move now. But first, the bracelet." My grandmother's letter had said it wasn't jewelry. It was a key. I'd worn that thin copper bracelet almost every day since the hospital. Under a magnifying glass, I found numbers etched inside the clasp, so tiny I needed the glass to read them: 09151968. September 15, 1968. But the numbers matched a format I recognized, a safe deposit box access code. I started calling banks in the area. On my 4th call, a branch manager in Charlottesville confirmed it. Francis Weber had maintained a safe deposit box at their location for over 15 years. I drove to Charlottesville the next morning. Inside the box were 3 items: a USB drive, a second set of financial records, and a sealed envelope containing a birth certificate. The birth certificate was old. Yellowed at the edges. Issued in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Name, Gerald Thomas Weber. Born, September 15, 1968. Mother, Frances N. Weber. My grandmother had a son. A child she'd been forced to give up at 17. A child no one in the family had ever mentioned. Not once. Not ever. The USB drive contained a video. I plugged it into my laptop in the bank parking lot. My grandmother appeared on screen, sitting in a kitchen I recognized, Helen Marsh's house. A notary sat beside her. Helen stood behind her with one hand on her shoulder. My grandmother spoke directly into the camera, her voice thin but unwavering. "I, Francis N. Weber, declare that any will produced by Martin Hale after March of last year is fraudulent. I am of sound mind. My daughter-in-law and my son have been stealing from me. This recording is my sworn testimony." She paused. Then she looked directly into the lens. "And to my Linda, I'm sorry I couldn't say this while I was still here. But I'm saying it now." I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking but my breathing was steady. Then I called Helen Marsh. "Helen," I said. "My grandmother had a son named Gerald." A long silence. Then Helen exhaled slowly. "She was waiting for you to find out." Helen told me the rest. Gerald Weber was alive. 70 years old, a retired forensic accountant living in Charlottesville. Francis found him 20 years ago. They reconnected in secret, because if Diane or Bob ever discovered the connection, they would have used it to paint Francis as unstable. And here was the part that stopped me cold. Gerald had been quietly working with Francis for the last 3 years. Analyzing the fraudulent transfers. Building a forensic trail. Because dismantling financial fraud was what he did for a living. My grandmother didn't just hide evidence under a floor. She recruited her own lost son to build an airtight case against the people robbing her. Helen's voice dropped to a whisper. Francis told me, they stole my piece, Helen. My son will make sure they pay for it. And Gerald had already submitted the full forensic file to the FBI. Now, before I continue, I want to take a quick pause. This channel collects real stories from people who've lived through family betrayal, manipulation, and the fight for truth, and we break down the psychology behind why people act the way they do. If you've made it this far, these stories clearly matter to you. Take a second to subscribe so you're here when the next one drops. My therapist, Dr. Angela Torres, provided a full competency evaluation within 48 hours. 3 pages. Clear, detailed, and unambiguous, Linda Caldwell demonstrates full cognitive and emotional competence. There is no clinical basis for a competency challenge. Nora filed the rebuttal. Diane's petition was thrown out before it reached a hearing. But the local court wasn't done protecting the Caldwells. Nora filed to void Martin Hale's will and recognize my grandmother's handwritten original. The motion was denied in 2 days. No hearing. No forensic review. A summary denial from Judge Walter Briggs. Nora called me from her car. That doesn't happen, Linda. A 2-day summary denial on a probate fraud case with FBI evidence attached. That does not happen. She paused. Judge Briggs and your father are both members of the Westlake Country Club. I pulled the sign-in logs. They've played golf together 4 times this year. Everything my grandmother feared was playing out exactly as she predicted. Nora filed to escalate to federal court. Bank fraud. Elder financial abuse. Forged legal documents. The FBI supported the transfer. The case moved to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. That evening, I called my mother directly. Not to argue. Not to beg. Just to inform her. Mom. I have the original will. I have the bank records. I have the forged signatures. The FBI is involved. You can stop this, or it all goes public. A long silence. Then Diane's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. You will regret this, Linda. You have no idea what you've started. I didn't flinch. I didn't start it, I said. Granny did. I hung up. My father went on the offensive. A story appeared in the Richmond Times-Dispatch. It read like journalism but felt like a press release. Bob was quoted directly, Linda is going through a difficult period after losing her grandmother. We only want to support her. He sounded calm, reasonable, even compassionate. And that's what made it dangerous. My mother posted on Facebook. An old Christmas photo, all 4 of us in matching sweaters, my grandmother in the center. The caption, our family is being torn apart by greed and false accusations. Please pray for us. The post was shared dozens of times. I wasn't named. I didn't need to be. Everyone knew. At work, my supervisor pulled me aside. I support you, Linda. But some donors are starting to ask questions. There was no private left. My parents had made sure of that. Then, the night before the federal hearing, my phone rang. Christine. Her voice was different. Not flat. Not dismissive. Something raw underneath. I want to testify, she said. Against Mom and Dad. I held the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen. Why? I asked. She was quiet for a long time. Then, because Grandma would have wanted me to tell the truth. And I'm tired of pretending I don't know what they did. The federal courthouse in Richmond rises from the street in limestone and glass. Impersonal. Massive. Completely indifferent to family drama. I parked 2 blocks away and walked. Outside the entrance, my father stood in a charcoal suit speaking to a reporter. "We're confident the truth will come out today," he said into the recorder. Calm. Controlled. Convincing. My mother stood behind him clutching a tissue, speaking to a woman from their church. "I just want my family back together," she said, loud enough for anyone passing to hear. Christine stood alone by the east wall of the building. Arms crossed. Staring at the pavement. When she looked up and saw me, something crossed her face I had never seen before. Not anger. Not indifference. It looked like fear. I walked past all 3 of them and through the courthouse doors. Inside, Nora Sims waited with her briefcase. Beside her stood Gerald Weber. Silver-haired, calm, steady as stone. The courtroom was half full. A dozen relatives scattered through the gallery. 2 reporters near the aisle. 2 U.S. Marshals posted beside the door. My father's legal team arranged their files at the defense table. Bob sat beside them. He glanced at Gerald, frowned, looked away. Judge Patricia Morrow entered. Small, silver-haired, precise. She took her seat and said one word, "Counsel." Nora stood. She held a folder in one hand and a small remote in the other. Behind her, a projector flickered to life. "Your Honor. This case begins with a death and a lie." A timeline appeared on the screen. 2 wills, side by side. The original handwritten one, and Martin Hale's version, filed 3 days after my grandmother died. Nora clicked the remote. FBI-certified handwriting analysis confirms with 99.6% probability that the signature on the Hale will does not belong to the deceased. She clicked again. Bank records filled the screen. Over $370,000 moved from Francis Weber's trust into an account controlled by Diane Caldwell. Each transfer linked to a forged authorization. My father's attorney stood. "Objection," Nora didn't turn around. "The provenance has been established through law enforcement recovery and federal forensic verification." Judge Morrow, overruled. "Continue." Then Nora read aloud from my grandmother's letter. Her voice carried across the silent courtroom. "I am writing this of sound mind. My daughter-in-law, Diane Caldwell, and my son, Robert Caldwell, have been systematically stealing from my trust for nearly 2 years. I fear that if I confront them, I will be silenced." One reporter froze mid-keystroke. 2 relatives in the second row exchanged a look of horror. My father sat rigid, jaw locked. My mother's hand moved to her throat, and this time, it wasn't acting. Then Nora said, "The plaintiff calls Gerald Weber." Gerald rose. He buttoned his jacket slowly and walked to the stand. My father frowned again, deeper this time. Gerald was sworn in. Nora approached. "Mr. Weber, please state your relationship to the deceased." Gerald turned his head slightly toward the gallery. His voice carried across the entire courtroom. "Frances Weber was my mother." The room didn't explode. It collapsed inward. A sharp collective inhale, then silence. Someone covered their mouth. A chair creaked. My father's head snapped toward Diane. "You told me her family was all gone," he whispered. Diane didn't answer. Her face had gone completely white. Gerald explained everything calmly. How Francis gave him up at 17. How they reconnected decades later. How he spent the last 3 years building a forensic case against the people stealing from her. Then Nora played the video. My grandmother appeared on the courtroom screen. Helen Marsh's kitchen. Notary present. Voice thin but unwavering. "Any will produced by Martin Hale after March of last year is fraudulent. I am of sound mind. My daughter-in-law and my son have been stealing from me. She paused. Looked directly into the lens. And to my Linda, I'm sorry I couldn't say this while I was still here. But I'm saying it now. The screen went dark. My father shoved back from the table. This is a setup, he shouted. Judge Morrow's gavel struck once. Sit down, Mr. Caldwell. Or I will hold you in contempt. Then Christine took the stand. My father's attorneys objected immediately. Judge Morrow barely glanced up. The witness is testifying voluntarily against her own financial interest. I'll allow it. Christine gripped the edge of the stand. She didn't look at our parents. She looked directly at the judge. I knew the will had been changed. I didn't know exactly how, but I knew Grandma would never have left Linda a broken cabin. She loved Linda more than any of us. She swallowed hard. Dad told me before Grandma died. He said, when she goes, everything comes to us, not Linda. She isn't built for it. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I accepted what I was given because that's what I was raised to do. Then she turned, not toward our parents. Toward me. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Linda. I'm telling the truth because Grandma deserved it. And because you're braver than I'll ever be. The courtroom went silent. My mother's chin trembled. She searched Christine's face, silently begging for something. But Christine had already turned away. Judge Morrow took 11 minutes. She returned and read from a prepared statement. This court finds the following. First, the document filed by Martin Hale is fraudulent and hereby declared void. My father's attorney closed his eyes. Second, the handwritten will recovered from the Lakeshore Trail property is recognized as the sole valid testament of the deceased. Third, Robert Caldwell is remanded to federal custody on charges of forgery, bank fraud, and elder financial abuse. Two marshals stepped forward. My father rose slowly. His mouth opened but nothing came out. Fourth, Diane Caldwell is remanded on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and filing a fraudulent competency petition. My mother gasped. She turned toward me. Linda, how could you do this to your own mother? I didn't turn around. Fifth, Martin Hale is charged with aiding and abetting the forgery of legal documents. His license is suspended immediately. Sixth, all assets within the Weber family trust are to be restored and distributed according to the valid will. Seventh, Judge Walter Briggs is referred to the Judicial Review Council for investigation of misconduct. The gavel fell. Handcuffs clicked around my father's wrists. A small, metallic, precise sound. For the first time since the hearing began, he looked directly at me. No anger left. Just the hollow recognition of a man who had run out of moves. Within weeks, the sentencing was finalized. Bob received 7 years in federal prison. Diane received 4. Martin Hale received 3 along with permanent disbarment. Judge Briggs resigned before the review board could finish its investigation. The Westlake Country Club revoked his membership. A small detail, but one my grandmother would have quietly appreciated. The trust was fully restored. Total recovered, just over $1.6 million. I didn't stare at the number long. The money was never the point. The point was the truth. Christine kept enough to rent a small apartment in Charlottesville and enroll in a counseling program. She returned everything else without being asked. She called once. I don't deserve forgiveness yet, she said quietly. But I want to someday. I didn't tell her she was forgiven. That wouldn't have been honest. Instead I said, then start there. Gerald moved into the finished cabin. Dale Hubbard's crew spent 4 months bringing it back to life. New floors, fresh plaster, windows that open without a fight, a kitchen with a gas stove and a hook by the door where my grandmother's old guest book now hangs. I hung the old photograph above the fireplace, right where the root cellar entrance used to be. Gerald's first morning in the cabin, I found him sitting in the porch chair with his coffee. The same chair my grandmother used to sit in. He said nothing. Just watched the lake. That silence felt like home. 6 months after the trial, I opened a small resource center in the building next to the cabin. Free legal support for people facing financial abuse inside their own families. I didn't build it to prove anything. I built it because I know what it feels like to hold the truth in your hands while no one is willing to listen. That evening, I sat on the porch at Lakeshore Trail. Gerald beside me. 2 mugs of decaf between us. The sky turned amber at the edges. Fireflies flickered to life above the lake. She would have loved this, Gerald said quietly. She planned it, I replied. We just showed up. If you've made it this far, I want to share something I've come to understand. When someone controls how your family sees you, calling you difficult, labeling your emotions as weakness, saving your vulnerability to use as a weapon later, that isn't parenting. That is a power structure designed to keep you small enough to manage. Diane didn't just steal money. She stole my voice inside my own family, so gradually that I spent years believing the silence was normal. And my grandmother, she couldn't fight them while she was alive because the people stealing from her controlled every system around her. The lawyer. The bank. The local court. So she did the only thing a woman in that position could do. She built her case in secret, hid it where only the one person she trusted would look, and waited. That isn't weakness. That is the most deliberate kind of strength there is. This story was collected from a real forum and modified to protect the privacy of the people involved. If this touched you even a little, please take a second to like this video. It helps this story reach people who might need to hear it. If you faced something similar, family betrayal, manipulation, or the courage to stand up when everyone told you to sit down, share your story in the comments. You might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe more people should hear stories like this, share this video with someone who needs it. Your support means everything to me and encourages me to keep bringing more stories like this to you. So hit that subscribe button and make sure you come back next time on Revenge Stories. Thank you for listening until the very end.